by Kona, and I've been collecting stories, and I just want to say a few words about where this kind of little side project came from, and that's that last summer I was at the Smithsonian doing a course on museum anthropology, and and everyone who was a part of the course picked some things to research. And so my interest, because I've been so focused on Daifukuji, and I'm writing a book about Daifukuji, I was really interested in trying to find something there that was connected to this congregation. And this was one of the things that I found. So I found Bishop Mitsumyo Tottori's notebooks, and they were in the archive. And so it didn't end up being my project for the course. The project is what I'll be talking about in July, because that's more focused on Kannon statues. But this, I just thought it would be useful to kind of bring this story back to Kona, and I hope that it's interesting to you. So, and please forgive me for mispronouncing any names. I'm absolutely sure that I'm going to mispronounce multiple names, so I apologize in advance. So in the archives at the Smithsonian, this Bishop Tottori's notebooks have been kind of archived for posterity. So I want to talk a little bit about who he is and why his work is kind of relevant to this congregation in this area. So he was born in Japan in 1898 in Shikoku, and then he was a Shingon priest. He came to Hawaii in 1925 and got married to a Nisei woman. So, as you know, when World War II started, when the U.S. entered World War II on December 7th, 1941, many priests and civic leaders in Hawaii were rounded up by the FBI immediately. They had lists that they were interested in, people whose patriotism to America they doubted. So I would say that most of us have been taught that all of the priests were rounded up and imprisoned, right? And some of them were kept in internment camps in the Hawaiian Islands, and many of them were sent to prison camps in the continental US. So I have this, authorities arrested 234 Issei priests from Hawaii and the mainland during the war, as well as 13 Nisei and Sansei priests. So actually he is known as Bishop Tottori, but at this point he was a reverend. So when I'm talking about this point in history, I'll call him Reverend Tottori. He was arrested and he was interrogated by the FBI. The reason that he was let go is that there had been kind of a written debate in some of the newsletters and newspapers at the time between Shingon priests that were arguing that that Hawaiian Japanese Americans should be on Japan's side, and so there is some really kind of vehement expressions of like, okay, Japanese in Hawaii should be on Japan's side, but Reverend Tottori at the time was writing against that. So this is all before Pearl Harbor. So he had 4 or 5 publications already that talked about the fact that he thought that the people of Japanese heritage in the Hawaiian Islands should be on America's side, right? And it probably helped that he married an Issei woman, and also that he had a lot of children, right, that had been born in Hawaii. So that's not to say that that other priests that were interned didn't have patriotism for America, weren't on America's side. This is just to say that the FBI had these articles in front of him when they were doing the interrogation. So he was one of the very, very few Japanese heritage priests that was released back into Hawaiian society. So he felt an obligation to really serve as one of the only kind of priests that was left in the Hawaiian Islands. So he was praying for Japanese American soldiers regardless of their sect, religion, or region. And just as a little side note, I think I think it's worth saying that as a part of this history, having such a kind of a pro-American stance at that time didn't come without difficulties, because there were many pro-American Japanese Americans, as you know. Many people in Hawaii were extremely pro-American, especially the folks that were sending their children off into the 442 and the 100th. So that is true. It's also true, and this is something that Reverend Tottori's biographers have talked a little bit about, is there were victory groups that were more kind of patriotic on the Japanese side, and that they were also in Hawaii, and there were several of those. And they were very antagonistic to what Reverend Tottori was trying to do, and the stance that that Japanese heritage folks in Hawaii should be on America's side. So this did come with some difficulties for him socially, and I think it's worth saying that the community was much more complex maybe than I understood at first, certainly. So the Buddhist temples were all closed at this time, and however, Reverend Tottori started doing services kind of like on the down low or in private. He was still monitored. He knew that he was still being monitored, but he felt this responsibility to hold services for people that he had a relationship with, but also people that he didn't know. So, oops, I went the wrong way. Okay. So what did he do exactly? He started collecting the names of Nisei casualties and doing memorial services for them. And he was making otoba for them, and he also had a prayer book of names, Hawaiian soldiers that had not passed away, that families were asking him to pray for their safety. And then he continued to do this for years. He did this through the Korean conflict and through part of the Vietnam conflict. So he did that for the casualties of war. So in the archive at the Smithsonian, the only translated notebooks were the World War II notebooks. So as somebody who does not speak Japanese or read Japanese, that was all that I had access to. It was the Reverend Kawanishi, who was kind of the next priest at the Shingon temple where Reverend Tottori had retired from. He's the person who found all of these, and he did the translations for the World War II notebooks. So this is just a picture of the Toba memorial tablets. So they're not as big as those. those are very big. From what I understand from reading through the archives, they were more like this size. So they were smaller, and he made over 400 of them. And then continued to use them and kind of put them on the altar during regular services. So when I went to the Smithsonian, I was interested in finding kind of direct connections with the Daifukuji congregation, and this is the information that I had. So I had taken pictures of the photo array that's kind of over there. In the Hando, so it's the casualties of war from various conflicts. You can see it over there to your left, and then also the Kona honor roll from World War II, I'd also taken a picture of that. And so I didn't know exactly who was a Daifukuji member, and what I've discovered is it really wasn't, doesn't seem to be that important to any of the congregations in town, right? What's important is that these are Kona soldiers, right? These are Kona kids. They grew up here, they went to school together. So these are the names that I looked up in the memorial notebooks. So I'll just go through the ones that I found. So the pictures are taken from that photo array over there. And then you can see in the middle the memorial inscription that was in the notebook, and I have an arrow kind of pointing to Akira Morihara's inscription. And then on the right side, you can see kind of the transcription of these notebooks. So I'm going to go through a few names. Kiyoshi Masunaga, you can see where his inscription is. Let me know if you want me to go slower, but I'll just take a beat with each soldier. Matsuo Furuchi. So here okay, so that's his inscription there. Shiro Ikeno. And there is some glare with my photographs, but also some of these notebooks were so old that there were some kind of boo-boos on them, so you can kind of see that. Okay. Hitoshi Kadoka. So this person, I started finding the names from the honor roll. So I kind of mistakenly thought initially that the photographs were Daifukuji members, and the folks that we didn't have photographs of, that they were from other congregations, right? Completely wrong about that. I still don't actually know who was a member of which church. All that I've come to understand that is fairly irrelevant, right? So this is, I put a little arrow next to his name on the honor roll, Hitoshi Kaduka, and then also an arrow where the inscription is. Okay. Kamio Fujitani. And there's arrows in both places. Toshio Fuji. Goro Matsuda. And George Ikeda. So I found many of the names, but there were many that I didn't find. And so I was also kind of curious why that was. So I started doing a little bit of digging in the archives to try to understand that a little bit more. So first of all, Reverend Tottori at the time was gathering names. Family members were sending him names. They were asking for memorials to be performed. He was looking at news reports, but he had very incomplete information, right? That, we know now we can go to Army websites and look at exactly who died and when, but that information was not available at the time. So missing in action soldiers were often not reported. And I have a picture here of Isamu Uzi, who was missing in action from Korea. There were certainly some Korean and Vietnamese, casualties from the Korean and Vietnam conflicts that were listed in the notebooks that were not translated, right? So I also didn't have access to those. And then he stopped making inscriptions and new toba in 1958. So trying to understand, still there were so many names that I couldn't find from World War II, and that was confusing to me. So I started kind of trying to understand, like, really, were there this many missing in action soldiers? and there were. So this is where the story of the royalty frank comes in. So there was a ship in January of 1942 that was taking soldiers from Honolulu back to Hilo. They were almost all Big Island soldiers, although there were some people on the boat that were sailors as well, right? So this ship was torpedoed by the Japanese in the Alenuahaha Strait, so right here in between Maui and Kohala. So this was, not everyone passed away. I think about half of the people who were on that ship passed away. Not everyone was. So for example, there's a local guy. There were 6 Kona boys, 5 of them died. Tokimaru Takamoto from Captain Cook survived that attack, right? He was on that ship, he survived, he was then sent to the front and kind of amazingly also survived his deployment and came home to the Kona area. This is a picture of all of the guys from that battalion that were on that ship, many of whom did not survive. The thing about this, again, just looking through the archives, I'm just really curious and sad about this story. It's a very sad story. I think the thing that was, the reason that Reverend Tottori was not able to make toba or do memorial inscriptions for these soldiers is that this attack was completely hidden from their families, right? So this was, and my understanding, or I'm surmising, but also in talking to other people, that there was just, the American military was terrified to let people know that there had been a Japanese submarine attack right there in the Hawaiian Islands all these months after Pearl Harbor. So it was a huge secret. Rescuers were told not to tell people, survivors were told not to tell people. It was a military secret, and it remained that way until the end of the war. So when we think about their families, right, and kind of what it would have been like for them, to not know what was going on with their children for all of these years, right, because this happened fairly early in the war. Okay, so that tells us what happened to some of the people on the kind of the Kona honor roll from World War II, and why Bishop Tottori wouldn't have had that information. So, there are a few memorials on the Big Island to victims of the Royalty Frank ship. So one of them I recently found out from Reverend Jigo, who found out from one of the congregation members that Kona Central Union Church has a memorial to these 5 individuals. I also found out, as I was looking, that the East Hawaii Veterans Cemetery kind of only recently, like within the last 15 years or so, put in a plaque to honor kind of everyone who was lost in that torpedo attack. Okay, so so going back to Bishop Tottori's story, I just want to talk a little bit more about what he did and kind of what his practice was. So in 1958, he kind of stopped making new inscriptions. He was like, okay, this part of this project is done, but he made these ohai to honor the fallen American and Japanese soldiers of World War II, which is really interesting, right? For somebody who had to kind of almost reject his Japanese heritage in order to kind of to be free, right, during the war. I think there was at this moment something happened, and he was like, okay, enough years have gone by, like it's important to honor all of the fallen, right? Both from my natal country and also from America. So he started, using this ohai during Obon and Mohican services. In addition, he was still doing monthly services dedicated to military personnel stationed around the world, and he did that until he passed away in 1976. His successor, who I mentioned earlier, who found a lot of these things and kind of worked with the family to make sure that all of this material was kind of cataloged and saved, in Smithsonian archives, etc., has continued to use those ohai in Obon and Mohican services, and they're at the Liliha Shingon mission, which is on Oahu. So that kind of gives you a snapshot of what I found in the archives, and I wanted to share these stories and kind of share the inscriptions, and I think that there's something comforting about knowing that there was somebody doing this work, this memorialization work at the time, when there were very, very few Buddhist priests that were permitted to kind of be doing this work on the islands. So that's all I have for you. If you have any questions, let me know. But otherwise, yeah, thank you so much for your kind attention, and thank you for being here.
Anyone have